John, welcome. Public sector employees should not expect an increase in their net salary by 15%. That's the assertion by finance lecturer Professor William Sepra. Government yesterday reached an agreement with public sector workers, that's the trade union, to implement a 15% cost of living allowance known as COLA. Thankfully, Professor Pepra, who is an associate professor with the Andrews University USA, will be joining us to explain why workers should be measured in their expectations. But joining us as well is the Deputy Minister for Employment and Labour Relations, Bright Rekubobert, for government's clarity on the allowance. We're grateful, sir, that you could join us. First of all, how did both sides, including government, settle on a 15% COLA for public sector workers?
Well, good evening, my brother, and good evening to cherished listeners out there. Indeed, yesterday was quite a hectic day, but in the end, it was rewarding. You recall that Labour on May 1st, through the TUC, had requested for government to look at what they call COLA, cost of living allowance, in the face of hardships that have generally befallen on Ghanaians. So the president, in his wisdom, after give and take on Eid, appealed to the labor force to exercise restraint, and then also admonished his side, as a government side, to amicably meet with labor and see how we can mitigate these hardships that have been induced as a result of this global effects. So fast forward, yesterday we met. It was not an easy one. Labour had requested 20%, and government, obviously, looking at how tight our fiscal space is, was very difficult to move up even from 5%. But, Labour put up very cogent arguments that last year they took 4%, this year they took 7%, and then at that time, inflation was not where it is now. Today, we are looking at around 29% or so, and so they pleaded with us that we also step up. We also made the argument that it's very, very difficult. In fact, a 1% increase in the emoluments basket amounts to over 300 million, and that alone was very huge for us. So we pleaded with them, but in the end, it was a win-win situation. We had to arrive at the 15%, 1.5%, effective July 2022.
Indeed, when you say a win-win situation, one may wonder, because in your subsequent analysis, in your subsequent submission, you made it quite clear that government initially settled for a 5% allowance, considering the tightening of the fiscal space. So, now that you've settled for a 15% allowance for these public sector workers, what could be the risks involved regarding the tightening of our fiscal space as we speak?
No, but you remember that Labour also had to come down from 20%. Initially, they didn't even want to come down at all because the inflation rate, indeed, if anybody held 100 cedis from the beginning of the year, it is no more 100 cedis now. And we are all in this. We must not pretend as if we have not seen, except that all of them and us understand that the problem is globally induced. And let's take it that the president, whatever it takes, wants to mitigate this effect of this global pandemic that has fallen everybody. So, that was first and foremost. And remember, our greatest asset we have in this country is the human resource, that is labor. And whatever it is, if labor is not able to go home with what they call now, everything has been eaten away by inflation and so on, we cannot look on like that. That's why I said they made cogent arguments. We also made same. But in the end, it's a matter of priority. If we think, and I think the president prioritized the labor force ahead of everything first and foremost. We are grateful to him. We are grateful to the ministers that met. You could see that it was a very high-level engagement. About 4 ministers and deputies were present. In the end, I think the information minister even joined. So 5 ministers who had to spend their whole time in labor yesterday. And for me, I think that the commitment to this negotiation was high. We need to commend each other. That is why I say win-win situation. We couldn't have just said, because of our tight fiscal space, there's nothing that we could do. At a point, finance people will have to step out. They will have to do calculations and all that. They will have to call the president himself. All of these things interplayed, so we got to where we got to.
Now, this is a cost of living allowance, and basically it is to cushion public sector workers, in your own words, from the hikes in inflation. But what happens when the tide turns, when we achieve economic stability? Will there still be a COLA?
Oh no! I mean, in this dispensation, you will recall that in 2014 there was a COLA. So we have history of COLA. The times that has engineered what has brought COLA now is not too different from 2014. And as things stabilize and normalize, then COLA goes away. So they will still go back to their basic pay.
So it's temporary?
Of course, that is the concept of COLA. You do this, we hope and pray. You know, the Bible says everything shall come to pass. This is a globally induced pandemic, globally induced challenge that we have had on our hands, and we need to mitigate this. So the president, in his wisdom, thinks that we need to do something. And this is a discussion between labor and government. And I'm sure at any point, the discussion continues. So when we get to the bridge, I'm sure we'll cross it.
Indeed. Bryce, we're grateful that you could join us with government's standpoint on this issue and for the clarity on the cost of living allowance. So let's bring in the Associate Professor of Finance at the Andrews University Business School at the USA, Professor Williams Kwesi Peprah. He joins us via Zoom. We're grateful that you could join us. You mentioned that public sector workers should expect their 15% subjected to some tax deduction. Can you shed more light on this analysis you've made?
Thank you very much, Charles, for calling me. So in the Ghana tax law, what's normally called cash allowance, which is paid to employees, are subject to tax. One such element is the COLA. So what I was expecting the trade union members to have negotiated was to go for a non-taxable COLA. What it means is that it would have allowed them to be exempted from paying pay as you earn on that amount. So what is currently going to happen is that though government has mentioned or have agreed a 15% increase in salary, it is not going to translate into a 15% increase in net salary or take home because of the tax implication. In fact, some workers may be worse off because when government is computing their chargeable income, the 15% COLA will be added to the basic salary plus any allowances before the PAYE tax bracket is applied. So this is what's going to happen. We shouldn't give workers the assurance that they are going to see a 15% increase in their net salary. This is something that we must make sure that workers understand, and then when it's paid, they don't also go and agitate again. COLA, or cost of living allowances, is a cash allowance which is subject to tax, and that is what is going to be applied now.
Indeed, indeed. And of course, we've heard from the Deputy Minister for Labour and Employment lay this particular claim. But it also begs the question about how sustainable this particular allowance is, because tax experts are also raising concerns that with this allowance also being dished out by government, it could escalate expenditure and put us in a very precarious situation. From your perspective, how prudent and sustainable do you think this cost of living allowance will be in the medium to long term?
I mean, so this cost of living allowance is to put it in layman's term, to cool down the engine or to cool down the tempest or the issues that is going on within the labor front, especially with the various strikes. In fact, um, it is anticipated that during inflationary period, normally it's best not to increase salaries. But looking at the condition of the Ghanaian in Ghana in terms of their net salary or take home, it is advisable that government will have to do something. So the 15% that government has given is just to cool down the employees and let them know that we government thinks about them. And what we are anticipating normally when it happens this way is that employees will now tend to invest, knowing that treasury bill or interest rate is going up in the country. So government find another way to collect the money back into its operation. That is what we are hoping that it will happen. But if employees decide to push it into consumption, it's also going to cause a little bit of inflation in the system. So normally government may have to find a balancing act, and I'm sure the 15% is something that government thinks that they can contain, and also to make sure that workers can live on it until things normalize and the cooler is taken off the payroll.
So there won't be any fiscal risks from your perspective?
I mean, now workers are assured that there's a 15% coming. So if any worker who works in public service is planning to go on a strike, to stop it. It is better to get people working, to get the system running, than to say you are not going to give any cooler, and then the system will come to a halt. So this is a temporary measure to make sure that workers are able to find their feet, be able to meet the inflationary pressures within the economy, and then government also have a peace of mind to plan. And in that respect, it is going to lead to a mutual benefit for both government and then the employees as well.
As always, we're grateful for your submission. Dr. Professor Williams Gosipipra there from the United States.